My son suddenly vomited at school. I called my husband, but he said coldly, I'm at work. You're the mother, handle it. I rushed to school, where police were waiting. Ma'am, please watch this footage, they said. The security camera recording played. An unbelievable person was on camera. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now let's dive into today's story. The toast had burned again. Tessa Grady stood at the kitchen counter, scraping blackened edges into the sink while the smoke alarm chirped its warning. She waved a dish towel beneath it until the sound stopped, then spread peanut butter across what remained of the bread. Behind her, Noah slumped at the table, his backpack still half-zipped, homework papers threatening to spill onto the floor. Mom, I can't find my pencil case, he said, his voice already carrying the edge of panic that came before school mornings. Check your room. Under the bed. Tessa didn't turn around. She knew where it would be. It was always under the bed, tangled in yesterday's clothes. I already looked there. Look again. Noah's chair scraped against the linoleum as he pushed back. His footsteps thudded up the stairs, each one a small explosion of frustration. 8 years old and already inheriting his father's impatience. Evan sat at the table where Noah had been, his phone angled away from her, his thumb moving in steady swipes. He hadn't looked up since she'd walked into the kitchen 20 minutes ago. His coffee sat untouched, growing cold in the chipped mug she'd bought him 3 Christmases ago. The one with the faded words, "World's best dad," that neither of them believed anymore. Tessa slid the plate of toast in front of Noah's empty chair and turned to face her husband. You're going to be late again. Evan's thumb paused. He didn't look up. I'll make it up tonight. The words landed between them like stones. He said that a lot. Made promises in the morning that evaporated by evening. Tonight, he'd have a meeting. Or drinks with colleagues. Or traffic. Always something that made the promise technically not a lie, just infinitely postponable. Noah has a math quiz today, Tessa said, wiping her hands on a towel. He's worried about it. He'll be fine. He needs help studying. He asked you last night. I was tired. Tessa folded the towel slowly, creasing each edge with precision. The kitchen felt smaller than it used to, the walls pressing in with accumulated silences. Pine Hollow, Pennsylvania, was the kind of town where everyone knew each other's business, where the single grocery store doubled as the social hub, where secrets had nowhere to hide, except in marriages. Those had endless hiding places. She'd noticed things lately, small things that added up to a shape she didn't want to name. Evan keeping his phone face down always. New passwords on accounts she used to have access to. The way his patience with Noah had thinned to something brittle and sharp. And money. There was never enough money, even though his salary hadn't changed, even though she'd cut back on everything she could think of cutting. When she asked about it, he'd wave her off. It's under control. But his jaw would tighten, and he'd leave the room, and the conversation would be over before it began. Noah came thundering back down the stairs, pencil case clutched in his fist. Found it. Where was it? Under the bed. Tessa allowed herself a small smile. Eat your toast. We leave in 5 minutes. Noah dropped into his chair and picked at the burnt edges. Evan finally looked up from his phone, his gaze sliding past his son to the clock on the wall. I have to go, he said, standing abruptly. He grabbed his keys from the counter, his wallet, his jacket from the back of the chair. The movements were practiced, efficient, the motions of someone always leaving. Will you be home for dinner? Tessa asked. Probably not. Don't wait up. He leaned down to kiss the top of Noah's head, but Noah was focused on his toast, and the gesture landed awkwardly, more obligation than affection. Evan straightened, met Tessa's eyes for half a second, then looked away. I'll call you, he said. The door closed behind him before she could respond. The house settled into its new quiet, the one that felt heavier than the noisy chaos of mornings. Tessa stood at the sink, staring at the blackened crumbs circling the drain, and felt the familiar weight of questions she didn't want to ask. Mom. Noah's voice pulled her back. Can you help me with my backpack? She turned, pushing everything else down into the place where she kept things she'd deal with later. Let's see what we've got. They spent the next 4 minutes repacking his bag, finding the homework he swore he'd put in there, zipping everything properly. Normal things. Safe things. The rituals that held mornings together. As they walked to the car, Noah took her hand. His palm was sticky with peanut butter. Do you think Dad's mad at me? He asked. Tessa stopped, crouched down to his level. The morning sun caught in his hair, turning it the same honey brown as hers. His eyes were worried, too old for 8. No, baby. He's just busy. He's always busy. I know. Is it because I'm bad at math? Something cracked inside her chest. She cupped his face in her hands. You're not bad at math. And Dad loves you. He's just going through something right now. What thing? Grown-up stuff. Nothing for you to worry about. But Noah's eyes stayed worried, and Tessa realized with sudden clarity that children knew. They always knew when the ground beneath them was shifting, even if they couldn't name what was wrong. Come on, she said, forcing brightness into her voice. Let's get you to school. You're going to do great on that quiz. The drive to Pine Hollow Elementary took 7 minutes. Tessa knew every pothole, every stop sign, every house they passed. The Millers with their overgrown lawn, the Chens with their perfect garden, the empty lot where the old hardware store used to be. This was her whole world, compressed into a handful of streets and familiar faces. She pulled up to the drop-off lane and kissed Noah's forehead. I love you. Have a good day. Love you too. He grabbed his backpack and scrambled out, running to join his friends near the playground. He turned once to wave, and she waved back, watching until he disappeared through the school doors. Then she sat in the idling car, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. Families survive on denial. That's what her mother used to say. You ignore the small cracks until they're too big to ignore, and by then you've built your life around them, and they're part of the foundation. Tessa pulled out of the parking lot and drove to work at the medical billing office where she'd been employed for 6 years. It was steady work, mind-numbing but reliable. She processed insurance claims, fielded phone calls from frustrated patients, and tried not to think too hard about anything beyond the next form that needed filling. The morning passed in its usual rhythm. Coffee at 9, bathroom break at 10:30, lunch at her desk while scrolling through her phone. She ate a sad salad and thought about nothing in particular, the way you do when thinking feels dangerous. At 11:40 a.m., her phone vibrated on the desk. Pine Hollow Elementary. Her stomach clenched before she even answered. Schools didn't call unless something was wrong. Mrs. Grady? The secretary's voice was tight, professional, but strained. Your son became very sick after lunch. We need you here as soon as possible. Tessa was already standing, grabbing her purse. What happened? He's been vomiting. The nurse thinks it might be food poisoning, but he's asking for you. Can you come now? I'm on my way. She hung up and called Evan immediately. It rang 4 times before he answered, his voice distracted. Yeah. It's Noah. The school called. He's throwing up. They want me there now. A pause. Background noise. Voices, movement, the sound of an office that didn't stop for emergencies. What do you want me to do about it? Evan said. Tessa stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the hallway at work, people moving past her, and processed what she'd just heard. I want you to care, she said quietly. I do care, but you're his mother. Handle it. Evan. I'm at work, Tessa. I can't just leave. You're closer anyway. The line went silent, not because the call dropped, because Evan had hung up. Tessa stood there, phone still pressed to her ear, heat rising in her chest. Not panic. Not yet. Something colder. Something that felt like clarity arriving too late. She lowered the phone, turned, and walked to her supervisor's desk. "Family emergency," she said. "I have to go." The parking lot at Pine Hollow Elementary was wrong. That was Tessa's first thought as she pulled in. There were too many cars. 2 police cruisers parked near the playground entrance. Their lights off, but their presence unmistakable. Her hands tightened on the wheel. Food poisoning didn't require police. She parked crookedly and ran toward the entrance, her purse bouncing against her hip. A young officer intercepted her at the door, his hand raised in a calming gesture that only increased her alarm. "Ma'am, are you Mrs. Grady?" "Yes." "Where's my son?" "He's safe. He's with the nurse right now. But before you see him, we need you to watch something." "I want to see my son." The officer's expression was kind but immovable. He was young, probably mid-20s, with the earnest face of someone who still believed in helping people. "I understand. And you will. But this is important. Please." He led her inside to a small office near the principal's suite. Another officer stood there, older, with graying hair and tired eyes. A laptop sat open on the desk, paused on a frame of security footage. "Mrs. Grady, I'm Officer Brennan," the older man said. "Your son is going to be fine. But we need to show you something that happened in the cafeteria today." Tessa's heart hammered against her ribs. "What happened?" "Just watch." Officer Brennan clicked play. The footage was grainy, shot from a camera mounted in the corner of the cafeteria. Timestamp 11:02 a.m. Children sat at long tables, eating lunch from trays and paper bags. Noah was visible at a table near the window, talking to a boy Tessa recognized from his class. Then a woman entered the frame. Tessa's breath caught. Bring Calder. Someone Evan had mentioned exactly once, months ago, when Tessa asked about his work. "Just a co-worker," he'd said dismissively. "She's in accounting." But here she was, walking directly to Noah's table. She crouched beside him, smiling, speaking words the camera couldn't capture. She reached into a canvas bag and pulled out a paper lunch sack, brown ordinary, with a smiley face drawn on the front in marker. Noah's face lit up. He took the bag, nodding at whatever Bryn was saying. She squeezed his shoulder, said something else, then stood and left the cafeteria. Noah opened the bag and pulled out a sandwich. He took a bite. Officer Brennan paused the video. Tessa stared at the frozen image of her son mid-chew, his expression happy, trusting. Her mind worked through the implications slowly, each piece clicking into place with terrible precision. "Who is she?" Officer Brennan asked. "Bring Calder." Tessa's voice sounded far away. "She works with my husband." "Did you know she was going to bring your son lunch today?" "No." "Did your husband mention it?" "No." The officers exchanged a glance. The younger one shifted his weight uncomfortably. "Mrs. Grady," Officer Brennan said gently, "your son became violently ill approximately 20 minutes after eating that sandwich. We've sent samples to the lab, but the paramedics believe it contained something that made him sick intentionally." The room tilted. Tessa gripped the edge of the desk. "Intentionally," she repeated. "Yes, ma'am." "Why would?" She stopped. The question died in her throat because the answer was already forming, pulling together from weeks of accumulated strangeness. Evan's distance, the money problems, the phone turned face down, the passwords. Only one person could have arranged this. "Where's my son?" she asked again, her voice steadier now. "Right this way." Noah lay on a cot in the nurse's office, pale and drawn. A trash can sat beside him, lined with a plastic bag. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow but regular. When Tessa entered, his eyes opened, and something in his expression broke her heart clean through. "Mom," he whispered. She dropped to her knees beside the cot, taking his small hand in hers. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." "I threw up everywhere." "That's okay. That's not your fault. The lady gave me special lunch. She said Dad sent it. Tessa's spine went rigid. She kept her voice calm, soft. The lady at lunch? The one who gave you the bag? Noah nodded weakly. She said Dad asked her to bring it. She said it was a treat because I worked hard in school. Did she say anything else? Just that it was a surprise. That Dad wanted to make me happy. His eyes welled with tears. Did I do something wrong? No. Tessa brushed his hair back from his damp forehead. You did nothing wrong. None of this is your fault. Do you understand? Noah nodded, but uncertainty remained in his eyes. Children always blame themselves, even when the fault belonged to adults who should have protected them. A paramedic appeared in the doorway. We're taking him to Mercy General for observation, just as a precaution. I'm coming with him. Of course. They transferred Noah to a stretcher, and Tessa followed them to the ambulance, her hand never leaving her son's. The young officer appeared at her elbow. Mrs. Grady, we'll need to speak with you after he's settled. My husband, she said, not looking at him. You need to speak with my husband. We will. We're locating him now. The ambulance doors closed, and Tessa sat beside Noah's stretcher as the vehicle pulled away from the school. Through the small window, she saw the gathered parents, the police cars, the principal standing on the steps with her arms crossed. Pine Hollow, the town where everyone knew everyone, was watching. Let them watch. Noah's hand was cold in hers. She held it gently, listening to the steady beep of the monitors, the rumble of the road beneath them. Her mind was already working, already cataloging, already building the structure of what came next. At the hospital, doctors examined Noah thoroughly. They took blood samples, asked careful questions, observed his symptoms with clinical detachment. Tessa sat in a plastic chair and answered everything they asked. Finally, a doctor approached her in the waiting room, a woman in her 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and no-nonsense demeanor. Mrs. Grady, your son is going to be fine. We're giving him fluids and anti-nausea medication. He should feel much better in a few hours. What made him sick? The doctor sat down beside her, her expression grave. We found evidence of spoiled dairy in his system, but that's not all. There were also traces of medication, an over-the-counter antihistamine, but in doses high enough to cause nausea and vomiting when combined with the spoiled food. Someone did this on purpose. That's what it looks like. The police have been informed. I'm required to report this as suspected child endangerment. Tessa nodded slowly. Suspected, as if there was any doubt. How bad could it have been? She asked. If he'd eaten more? He could have been severely dehydrated, possibly hospitalized longer. But whoever did this, they seemed to know how to make him sick without causing permanent damage. Calculated. Yes. The word hung between them, stark and unforgiving. Tessa stood. Can I see him? Of course. He's asking for you. She followed the doctor back to Noah's room. He was propped up on pillows, and 4 in his small arm, but his color was returning. When he saw her, he tried to smile. I feel better now, he said. Good. That's good. She sat on the edge of his bed, careful not to jostle him. Noah, I need you to tell me exactly what the lady said. Can you do that? He nodded, his expression serious. She came over and said, Hi, Noah. Your dad asked me to bring you something special. And I said, okay. And she gave me the bag and said, he's really proud of you for working hard. This is a special lunch just for you. Did she say her name? No, but she was really nice. She smiled a lot. And you're sure she said Dad sent it? Yes, she said it twice. Tessa absorbed this, her jaw tight. Thank you for telling me, baby. You're very brave. Am I in trouble? No, you're safe, and you're never going to be in trouble for this. I promise. She stayed with him while he drifted into sleep, exhausted from being sick. The 4 dripped steadily. The machines beeped their reassurance. And Tessa sat in the dimming afternoon light, watching her son breathe, while inside her chest something cold and immovable settled into place. Evan had done this, or arranged for it to be done. The how and why didn't matter yet. Those would come. What mattered was that her husband had decided their son was an acceptable casualty in whatever game he was playing. Her phone buzzed. A text from Evan. Just heard. Is he okay? She stared at the words. The casual concern. The plausible deniability of someone who'd been at work and was just now hearing. She didn't respond. Instead, she called Officer Brennan. I'm ready to talk, she said. The house felt different when Tessa returned that evening. Noah was staying overnight at the hospital for observation, and she'd left him in the care of nurses who promised to call if anything changed. Evan had texted 3 more times, each message a variation of concern that sounded hollow through the screen. She'd ignored them all. Now she stood in her kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd burned toast that morning, and everything looked alien. The coffee cup Evan had abandoned, the chair Noah had sat in, the counter where she'd spread peanut butter while her family fell apart around her. She set her purse down carefully. Then she began to search. Not frantically, not emotionally. Tessa had spent years managing a household, tracking expenses, filing documents. She knew how to be methodical. She started with the obvious places, the desk in the living room where Evan paid bills, the filing cabinet in the spare room, the drawer in their bedroom where he kept his wallet and keys at night. The desk first. She pulled open drawers one by one. Pens, paper clips, old receipts, and then, wedged behind a stack of manuals for appliances they no longer owned, she found them. Unopened bills. 3 months of credit card statements, still in their envelopes. 2 notices from the bank about insufficient funds. A letter from a collection agency requesting payment for a debt she didn't recognize. Tessa sat in the desk chair and opened each one with deliberate care. She read them slowly, absorbing the numbers. $17,000 on one credit card, $23,000 on another. Cash advances, balance transfers, interest compounding like a tumor. None of this should have been possible. She monitored their finances. She knew what came in, what went out. Unless Evan had opened accounts she didn't know about, which apparently he had. She photographed every document with her phone, every page, every number. Then she returned them to exactly where she'd found them. The laptop next. Evan's personal computer sat on the desk, closed. She opened it, expecting a password screen, but it booted directly to his desktop. He'd been in a hurry that morning, hadn't locked it, a mistake that would cost him everything. She opened his email first, scrolled through weeks of correspondence. Most of it was mundane. Work stuff, spam, newsletters he never read. Then she found a folder labeled Personal. Inside were emails he'd archived, thinking they were hidden. Messages to Bryn. Tessa's hands remained steady as she read them. The first few were innocuous. Work questions. Schedule coordination. Then they shifted, became familiar, then intimate. The progression was textbook, the affair starting slowly, building momentum, until boundaries dissolved. But what made her stop, what made her breath catch, was an email from 3 weeks ago. From Evan Grady to Bryn Calder. Subject, the plan. We need the money. You know that. This is the only way out. It's not going to hurt him, just enough to cause a scare. The school will panic, probably blame cafeteria negligence. We file the claim, get the payout, and everything gets handled. Nobody gets hurt. We just need to be smart about timing. Tessa read it 3 times. Then she took screenshots. Then she kept reading. Bryn's response had been uncertain. Are you sure about this? It seems really risky. Evan's reply, trust me. I've thought it through. Just do exactly what I said. Bring the lunch. Act like you know him. Say I sent it. That's it. Simple. There were more emails. Planning details. Discussions about which medication to use. How much to mix in. How to handle the aftermath. Bryn kept expressing doubt. Evan kept reassuring her. And nowhere in any of it did either of them acknowledge that they were planning to poison a child. Tessa's son. Their son. She saved everything to a folder on her own phone. Then she opened the browser history. Searches from 2 weeks ago. Insurance payout for child injury. Negligence claims school. Symptoms of food poisoning. Medications that cause vomiting. She photographed those too. In the filing cabinet behind old tax returns and birth certificates. She found something that stopped her completely. A life insurance policy on Noah. $500,000. She pulled it out slowly, as if it might combust in her hands. The application was dated 6 months ago. The signature at the bottom was supposedly hers, but Tessa had never seen this document before. She studied the signature closely. It looked like hers, the same slant, the same loops, but she hadn't signed it. Evan had forged it. She sat on the floor of the spare room, the policy in her lap, and finally let herself feel the rage. It built slowly, starting in her stomach and rising through her chest, until her hand shook with it. But she didn't scream, didn't cry. She breathed through it, controlled it, shaped it into something she could use. Her phone rang. Officer Brennan. Mrs. Grady, we've brought your husband in for questioning. We'd like you to come down to the station. I'll be there in 20 minutes. We've also picked up Bryn Calder. She's being questioned separately. I want to be there for that too. We can arrange that. Tessa hung up. She stood, gathered every document she'd found, every photograph she'd taken, and put them in a folder. Then she locked the house and drove to the Pine Hollow police station. The station was small, just 4 rooms and a waiting area that doubled as the reception desk. Officer Brennan met her at the door. Your husband is in interview room 1 with his lawyer. Bryn Calder is in room 2. We're waiting on her attorney, but she's agreed to talk to us until he arrives. I want to hear what she says. I'll set you up in observation. But Mrs. Grady, he paused, his expression cautious. Whatever you hear in there, you can't interrupt. This is official questioning. I understand. He led her to a small room with a one-way mirror. Through the glass, she could see Bryn Calder sitting at a metal table, her hands folded in her lap. She was younger than Tessa expected, maybe 30, with blonde hair pulled into a ponytail and eyes that were red from crying. Officer Brennan entered the interview room with a female Detective Tessa didn't recognize. They sat across from Bryn and started a recording device. Ms. Calder, the detective said, you've agreed to speak with us before your lawyer arrives. You understand you have the right to remain silent. Yes. Bryn's voice was small, shaky. But I want to explain. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it would be like this. Didn't know what? That it would make him that sick. Evan said it would just be a little upset stomach. He said the school would think it was bad cafeteria food, that they'd get in trouble, not us. Why did you agree to bring lunch to Noah Grady? Bryn's face crumpled. Because Evan asked me to, and I thought I loved him. He told me about his money problems, about how the debt was crushing him. He said this was the only way out. Did he mention insurance money? Yes. He said there was a policy, that if Noah got sick and the school was blamed, they could sue and the insurance would pay out. He said it was foolproof, that nobody would get seriously hurt. Did you believe him? Tears spilled down Bryn's cheeks. I wanted to. I kept saying it seemed wrong, but he was so sure. And he kept telling me it was the only option left. That, if I really cared about him, I'd help him. The detective leaned forward. Did you know what you put in that sandwich? Evan told me. Some yogurt that had gone bad. And crushed up allergy pills. He said it would just make Noah throw up a few times. Nothing serious. Did you consider what could happen to a child if he ingested spoiled food and medication? Bryn buried her face in her hands. I know it was stupid. I know. But Evan said he'd calculated everything. That his son would be fine. That it was all under control. Behind the glass, Tessa watched this woman cry. Part of her wanted to feel satisfaction at Bryn's distress, but mostly she felt something colder. Bryn had made a choice, a stupid, selfish, destructive choice, and whether she'd intended harm or not didn't change what she'd done. "Ms. Calder," Officer Brennan said gently, "we need you to tell us everything. Every conversation with Evan Grady about this plan. Every detail. Can you do that?" Bryn nodded, wiping her eyes. "Yes, I'll tell you everything." And she did. For the next 40 minutes, Tessa listened to Bryn describe how Evan had seduced her. First emotionally, then physically. How he'd complained about his marriage, his financial stress, his feeling of being trapped. How he'd painted himself as a victim of circumstance who just needed one break to fix everything. Then, gradually, he'd introduced the idea. What if something happened to make the school liable? What if Noah got sick from cafeteria food? What if there was a lawsuit that could erase the debt? Bryn had resisted at first, but Evan had been persistent, charming, reassuring, and eventually she'd agreed. Did Evan Grady ever express concern for his son's well-being? The detective asked. Bryn hesitated. He said Noah would be fine. That kids throw up all the time. That it wasn't a big deal. That's not what I asked. Did he express concern? No, not really. He just kept talking about the money. When the questioning finally paused for Bryn's lawyer to arrive, Officer Brennan came back to the observation room where Tessa waited. "Do you want to see your husband?" he asked. "Yes. He's asking for you." "I'm sure he is." Evan sat at another metal table, his lawyer beside him, a man in an ill-fitting suit who looked barely older than Bryn. When Tessa entered with Officer Brennan, Evan's expression shifted through several emotions: relief, fear, calculation, then something that might have been remorse but looked more like self-pity. "Tessa," he said, "thank God. Tell them this is a misunderstanding." She sat across from him slowly. Officer Brennan remained standing by the door. "A misunderstanding," she repeated. "Yes. Bryn, she's confused. She's making things up. I never asked her to hurt Noah." Tessa studied her husband's face. 13 years of marriage. She'd memorized every expression, every tell. She could see the lie in the way his eyes wouldn't hold hers for more than a second, in the tension in his jaw, in the way his hands gripped the edge of the table. "I found the emails," she said quietly. Evan's face went white. "What emails?" "The ones where you planned this, step by step, with Bryn." "I don't know what you're talking about." "The life insurance policy, too. The one with my forged signature. $500,000. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Grady, I need to advise my client not to." "I'm not talking to you," Tessa said, her eyes never leaving Evan's. "I'm talking to my husband, the man who decided our son was worth less than his gambling debts." "It wasn't like that," Evan said, his voice rising. "You don't understand the pressure I was under, the calls from collectors, the threats. I was desperate. So you poisoned our child." "I never wanted him hurt. It was just supposed to be a little scare. Enough, too." He stopped, realizing too late that he'd just confirmed everything. Tessa leaned forward. "Enough to what? Enough to blame the school? Enough to file an insurance claim? Enough to pay off your debts with money from our son's suffering?" "You make it sound so." "So what? So criminal?" "Because it is. You conspired to endanger a child for financial gain. That's what the charges will say." Evan's lawyer tried again. "Mrs. Grady, anything you say here can and will be used against him." "I know. That's the point." She stood, her chair scraping against the concrete floor. "You thought I'd protect you, didn't you? You thought I'd put family first, stay quiet, help you get away with it." Evan stared at her. "Tessa, please. Think about Noah. Think about what this will do to him." "I am thinking about Noah. That's the only thing I'm thinking about. And what will protect him is making sure you never get the chance to hurt him again. She turned to Officer Brennan. I have documents, bank statements, credit card bills, emails, browser history, and a forged insurance policy. Everything you need. Tessa, no. Evan half rose from his chair, but his lawyer pulled him back down. She looked at her husband one last time. You made pressure. Then you handed it to our child. And you expected me to forgive that. I'm still his father. No, Tessa said, her voice steady and cold. You forfeited that when you decided he was worth less than money. She walked out of the interview room without looking back. The days that followed moved with strange momentum. Evan was formally arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit child endangerment, insurance fraud, and forgery. Bryn was charged as an accomplice. The news spread through Pine Hollow like wildfire, and suddenly Tessa couldn't go to the grocery store without people staring, whispering, approaching her with sympathy that felt more like voyeurism. She ignored them all. Noah came home from the hospital and seemed physically recovered, but something had changed in him. He was quieter, more watchful. He asked about his father once, and Tessa told him the truth in the gentlest way she could manage. Dad made a really bad choice. He hurt you, and now he has to face consequences for that. Is he in jail? Yes. Is he coming back? No. Noah had nodded, processing this in the way children do, accepting what couldn't be changed, even when it hurt. Tessa hired a lawyer, not for Evan but for herself and Noah, to file for divorce, to ensure Evan had no parental rights, to protect what was left of their lives. The lawyer, a woman named Rita Morrison, who'd handled family law in Pine Hollow for 20 years, reviewed all the evidence Tessa had gathered. This is thorough, Rita said, impressed. Prosecutors will have no trouble building a case. Good. The divorce will be straightforward, given the circumstances. You'll have full custody. I want a restraining order, too. And I want his name removed from everything. Bank accounts, the house deed, Noah's school records. I can arrange all of that. Tessa sat across from Rita in her small office above the pharmacy. Afternoon light, slanting through dusty blinds. What are his chances? In court. Rita leaned back in her chair. With this evidence, and Bryn Calder's testimony, he'll plead guilty to avoid trial. The question is sentencing. Child endangerment could get him 3 to 7 years, depending on the judge. Add the fraud charges, the forgery, the conspiracy, he's looking at real time. Not enough. Probably not, but it's something. Tessa nodded. Real time. That would have to be enough, because the justice system couldn't give her what she really wanted. Couldn't undo what happened, couldn't erase Noah's memory of getting sick, couldn't restore the trust that had been shattered. But it could make sure Evan paid something for what he'd done. The preliminary hearing happened on a cold morning in November. Tessa sat in the back of the courtroom. Noah at home with her mother, who'd driven in from Ohio to help. She debated bringing him, showing him how accountability worked, but decided he was too young to see his father in handcuffs. Evan entered in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed, his face gaunt. He'd lost weight. His hair was unkempt. The confident man who'd sat at her kitchen table scrolling his phone was gone, replaced by someone who looked smaller, diminished. Their eyes met across the courtroom. He tried to smile. She looked away. The hearing was brief. The prosecutor outlined the charges. Evan's lawyer argued for reduced bail, claiming his client wasn't a flight risk. The judge listened impassively, then set bail at $100,000, far more than Evan could afford given his debt. He'd be staying in jail until trial. As they led him out, Evan turned back to look at Tessa one more time. His expression was pleading, desperate. She met his gaze evenly and felt nothing. Not hate, not anger, not even satisfaction. Just a cold, settled certainty that this was necessary. Outside the courtroom, Rita caught up with her. The DA wants to offer a plea deal. 7 years with possibility of parole after 4. He'll have to allocate admit everything on the record, and he'll be required to forfeit any claims to insurance money or marital assets. Will he take it? His lawyer's recommending it. Going to trial would risk a longer sentence. When will we know? Soon. They're discussing it now. Tessa nodded and walked to her car. The sky was overcast, threatening snow. She sat behind the wheel and called her mother. How's Noah? Good. We're making cookies. He wants to know when you'll be home. Soon. I'm leaving now. How did it go? Tessa watched a leaf skitter across the parking lot, pushed by wind. It went. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Are you okay? I will be. She hung up and drove home through streets she'd known her entire life, past the elementary school where Noah learned his multiplication tables, past the park where they'd gone for summer picnics, past the house where she'd lived with Evan, building what she'd thought was a life. All of it looked different now. Not worse, just different, like seeing a familiar landscape with new eyes and realizing the geography had always been something other than what you'd believed. When she got home, Noah ran to meet her at the door, his face smudged with flour. We made chocolate chip, he announced. Did you save me one? 3. She hugged him tightly, breathing in the smell of his shampoo and cookie dough. He was safe. He was here. And that was the only thing that mattered. That night, after Noah went to bed, Tessa sat at the kitchen table with a mug of tea and went through her mother's old photo albums. Pictures of her childhood, her parents before they divorced, her own wedding to Evan, both of them young and hopeful and certain that love would be enough. She stopped at one photo, Evan holding newborn Noah in the hospital, his expression awestruck. She'd believed in that man, the one who'd cradled their son like he was made of glass, who'd stayed up all night when Noah had colic, who'd taught him to ride a bike and read bedtime stories with funny voices. That man had existed, but so had the man who decided his child was an acceptable sacrifice. Both were true, and Tessa was done trying to reconcile them. She closed the album and put it away in a box she labeled archive. Not garbage, not destroyed, just stored, a record of what had been, without pretending it was something to return to. 3 weeks later, Evan took the plea deal. Tessa wasn't present for the allocution, but Rita sent her the transcript. She read it alone in her car after dropping Noah at school, parked in the same spot where she'd received the call about him getting sick. The transcript was clinical. Evan's voice rendered flat on paper as he admitted to each charge. Conspiracy, endangerment, fraud. The words carried no emotion in print, but Tessa could imagine how he'd sounded, resigned, defeated, trying to maintain some scrap of dignity while confessing to poisoning his own child. At the end, the judge had asked if he had anything to say. Evan's response, I never wanted anyone to get hurt. I was desperate and I made terrible choices. I'm sorry. Tessa folded the transcript and put it in her glove compartment. Sorry. Such an insufficient word for such deliberate harm. But it was all he'd offered, and she hadn't expected more. The sentencing would come later, but the outcome was settled. 7 years. Possibility of parole after 4. Permanent loss of parental rights. Restraining order preventing him from contacting Noah or Tessa without court approval. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was done. Pine Hollow had always been small, but after the trial it felt claustrophobic. Everyone had opinions about what had happened, about Evan's guilt, about whether Tessa had been too harsh or not harsh enough, about what kind of man could hurt his own child. The whispers followed her everywhere. Some people were supportive, bringing casseroles, offering to watch Noah, sending cards with generic messages of encouragement. Others were colder, suggesting maybe she'd pushed Evan to desperation. Maybe she'd been blind to his suffering. Maybe she bore some responsibility for not preventing what happened. She ignored both groups. Her focus narrowed to 2 things: healing Noah and rebuilding their life. Everything else was noise. Noah struggled in ways that weren't always visible. He stopped eating lunch at school for 3 weeks, afraid someone would give him food that would make him sick again. Tessa had to pack his lunch every day and sit with him during the first few days until he trusted the school again. He had nightmares. Not every night, but often enough that Tessa grew accustomed to being woken at 2 a.m. by his voice calling for her. She'd go to his room and find him sitting up in bed, disoriented and scared, and she'd hold him until he fell back asleep. "It's just dreams," she'd tell him. "They can't hurt you." But they could hurt him. They were hurting him. Memories had weight, even for children. She took him to a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Ellis, who specialized in childhood trauma. Noah went reluctantly at first, suspicious of the office with its colorful toys and gentle questions. But gradually he opened up, talking about what happened in ways he couldn't with his mother. "He's resilient," Dr. Ellis told Tessa after one session, "but he's processing a profound betrayal. It'll take time." "How much time?" "There's no timeline for healing, but he's doing the work. That's what matters." Tessa nodded, taking comfort in the idea that work equaled progress, even when progress felt invisible. The divorce finalized in January. Tessa signed the papers in Rita's office while snow fell outside, soft and persistent. 13 years of marriage ended with a signature and a stamp. No ceremony, no witnesses, just paperwork that legally severed ties that had already broken. Rita pushed a folder across the desk. "The house is yours. The car. Full custody of Noah. Evan's wages will be garnished for child support, but given his incarceration, that won't amount to much for a while. I don't want his money. Take it anyway. For Noah's sake. College fund. Something." Tessa accepted the folder. "What about the insurance policy?" "Voided. Fraudulent signature means it was never valid. The companies dropped the whole thing." "Good." Rita studied her for a moment. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine." "Tessa." "I am. I'm managing. I have a job, a roof over our heads, a son who's healing. I'm fine." Rita didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. "If you need anything, I know where to find you." Tessa left the office and drove home through the snow. The house was quiet when she entered. Her mother had returned to Ohio, confident that Tessa could handle things now. Noah was at school. The silence felt different than it used to. Not oppressive, just present. A space waiting to be filled with whatever came next. She made herself lunch, something simple she could eat standing at the counter. Then she went to the spare room where Evan's things still lived in boxes. She'd packed them months ago, but hadn't decided what to do with them. Now she loaded the boxes into her car and drove them to a donation center on the edge of town. Clothes, books, old electronics. Pieces of a life that no longer existed. The volunteers accepted everything without question, and Tessa drove away lighter. At home, she cleaned out the spare room completely. Vacuumed, wiped down surfaces, opened windows despite the cold to air out the space. Then she set up her sewing machine, a hobby she'd abandoned years ago, and turned the room into something for herself. Not for storage, not for Evan's overflow, just hers. When Noah came home that afternoon, he noticed immediately. "You changed the room," he said, standing in the doorway. "I did. I'm going to start sewing again. Maybe make some quilts. Can you make me one?" "What colors?" "Blue and green. Like the ocean." "I can do that." He smiled, and something in Tessa's chest eased. February arrived cold and bright. One morning, Tessa got a call from the district attorney. "Mrs. Grady, I wanted to inform you that the sentencing hearing is scheduled for March 3rd. You're welcome to provide a victim impact statement if you choose." "What's that?" "An opportunity for you or Noah to address the court about how this has affected you. It's not required, but it can influence sentencing." Tessa considered this. Would Noah have to testify? Only if you wanted him to. We could also submit a written statement on his behalf. "I'll think about it." "Take your time. Let me know by the end of the month. After hanging up, Tessa sat with the question. What would she say to a court full of strangers about what Evan had done? How could she compress the damage into a statement that made sense to people who hadn't lived through it? She spent the next week trying to write something, draft after draft, each one feeling inadequate. The words were either too clinical or too emotional, too forgiving or too harsh. Nothing captured the reality that her husband had looked at their child and seen a solution instead of a person. In the end, she wrote something simple. My son trusted the adults in his life to keep him safe. His father violated that trust in the worst possible way. Noah is healing, but the fear and confusion Evan caused will stay with him. I want the court to understand that this wasn't a moment of poor judgment. It was calculated, planned, and it could have been much worse. I ask that the sentencing reflect the seriousness of endangering a child for personal gain. She read it over once, then sealed it in an envelope and mailed it to the DA's office. The sentencing hearing was on a Tuesday. Cold, but clear, the kind of March day that promised spring without delivering it. Tessa wore a simple navy dress and drove herself to the courthouse. This time, Noah stayed with a friend's mother, insulated from the final chapter of his father's fall. The courtroom was more crowded than she expected. Reporters from regional papers, people from Pine Hollow who'd followed the case, Bryn's family in the back row, looking miserable, and Evan's mother, sitting alone near the front, her face drawn and aged. Tessa took a seat in the middle, not too close, not too far, just present. When Evan was brought in, he looked worse than at the last hearing. Thinner, grayer. His jumpsuit hung loose on his frame. He scanned the courtroom and found Tessa. This time he didn't try to smile, just looked at her with something that might have been shame or resignation. She held his gaze until he looked away. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the case briefly. Then she asked if there were any statements. The prosecutor read Tessa's letter aloud. The words sounded strange in another voice, more official, less personal, but they were accurate. Evan's lawyer made a plea for leniency, citing his client's remorse and lack of prior criminal history. It was half-hearted at best. Even the lawyer seemed aware that arguing for mercy in a case like this was theater. Then the judge spoke. Mr. Grady, the court has considered all the evidence and statements. What you did to your own child is unconscionable. You prioritized debt over his safety, and you involved another person in your scheme, compounding the harm. This wasn't an impulsive mistake. It was premeditated, calculated, and utterly without regard for the person you were supposed to protect above all others. Evan stood with his head bowed, hands cuffed in front of him. You will serve 7 years in state prison with no possibility of parole before 4 years. You will be permanently stripped of parental rights to Noah Grady. You will have no contact with the child or his mother except through court-approved channels. And you will register as a child endangerment offender upon release. The gavel came down. 7 years. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. As they led Evan away, he turned one last time. Tessa didn't look away, didn't flinch. She watched him disappear through the door, and then it was done. Outside the courthouse, reporters tried to approach her. She waved them off and walked to her car quickly. Rita caught up with her before she could leave. Are you okay? Rita asked. Yes. 7 years is a decent sentence for this kind of case. I know. And the permanent loss of rights means Noah is protected. I know that too. Rita touched her shoulder gently. You did everything right, Tessa. Everything. You protected your son, and you made sure Evan faced consequences. Not every mother would have had the strength to do that. Tessa nodded, accepting the words even though they felt strange. She hadn't felt strong. She'd felt desperate, furious, determined. But maybe those were versions of strength too. Thank you, she said, for everything. Call me if you need anything, even just to talk. I will. She drove home through familiar streets, the sentencing behind her, the future still uncertain, but no longer tangled with Evan's choices. At home, she called Noah's friend's mother. "Can I pick him up?" "Of course. He's doing great. They're playing in the yard." When she arrived, Noah ran to her, cheeks flushed from cold and running. "Can Jamie come over?" he asked. "Maybe this weekend. Let's get you home first." In the car, Noah was quiet for a while. "Then was today the court thing?" "Yes." "Is it over?" "Yes." "Good." He looked out the window, watching houses pass. "I don't want to talk about Dad anymore." "We don't have to. Ever." Tessa glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "If you want to someday, we can. But we don't have to." "Okay." And that apparently was enough for him. Spring came slowly to Pine Hollow. Snow melted in uneven patches. Crocuses pushed through frozen ground. Trees budded tentatively, waiting for proof that winter had truly ended. Tessa planted a garden. Not a big one, just a small plot in the backyard where she grew tomatoes, peppers, and herbs. Noah helped, digging holes and dropping in seeds with serious concentration. It gave them something to do with their hands, something to watch grow. Life settled into new rhythms. Work, school, dinner together, homework, bedtime stories, weekend projects, small things that accumulated into normalcy. People stopped whispering eventually. The scandal lost its novelty. Pine Hollow moved on to newer gossip, and Tessa and Noah faded back into the background of community life. Sometimes Noah asked questions. "Do you think Dad thinks about me?" "I don't know," Tessa would answer honestly. "Maybe. Do you think about him?" "Sometimes, but not the way I used to." "What way?" "I think about what happened, not about missing him." Noah would nod, processing this in his own time. Dr. Ellis said he was doing well. The nightmares had decreased. His anxiety around food had improved. He was laughing more, playing more, acting like a child again instead of someone carrying adult worries. "He's going to be okay," Dr. Ellis told Tessa. "He has you. That matters more than you might think." Tessa wasn't sure she believed that, but she tried. One evening in late May, after dinner, Noah asked if they could look at photo albums. "Which ones?" Tessa asked, surprised. "The old ones, from when I was little." She hesitated, then went to get the albums from the closet. They sat on the couch together, flipping through pages. Baby pictures, first birthdays, Christmases, vacations. Evan appeared in many of the photos. Younger, happier, holding Noah, or standing beside Tessa with his arm around her shoulders. Noah studied one picture, Evan teaching him to ride a bike, both of them smiling. "He was nice sometimes," Noah said quietly. "Yes, but he still did the bad thing." "Yes. People can be both?" Tessa looked at her son, this small person trying to make sense of complexity that many adults never figured out. "Yes," she said, "people can be both. That doesn't excuse what they do, but it's true." Noah closed the album and leaned against her. "I'm glad we're safe now." "Me too." That night, after Noah fell asleep, Tessa stood at his bedroom door watching him breathe. The moonlight through the window lit his face, peaceful and young. He looked like Evan around the eyes. That resemblance would probably bother her someday, but not tonight. Tonight, he just looked like her son. Safe. Healing. Hers. She pulled his door, almost closed. He liked it cracked, so the hallway light came through, and walked to her own room. The house was quieter now. Smaller in some ways. But it was theirs. No secrets. No lies. No one who would use them as tools for their own gain. She locked the front door, checked the windows, turned off the lights one by one until only the hallway light remained, keeping watch through Noah's doorway. In the darkness, Tessa lay in bed and thought about forgiveness. Some people would expect her to forgive Evan eventually, to let go of anger for her own peace, to model mercy for Noah. But forgiveness required trust, and Evan had obliterated that. He'd looked at their child and seen a means to an end. And nothing, no apology, no time served, no remorse, could undo that calculation. She didn't hate him. Hate required energy she didn't have to spare. She simply refused him any further access to her life or her son's, refused him softness, refused him the comfort of reconciliation, refused him anything that might suggest what he'd done was forgivable. Her family was smaller now, but it was safe, and no one who had ever used her child as a tool would get another chance. Not forgiveness, not silence, not mercy. That was her promise to Noah and to herself. In the morning, she'd wake up and make breakfast. Check that Noah's homework was in his backpack. Drive him to school and go to work. Plant more seeds in the garden. Make dinner. Read stories. The ordinary rhythms of life that were, in their own way, an act of resistance. Because Evan had tried to destroy them and they'd survived. They were still here, still whole, still building something new from what remained. And that, Tessa decided, was enough.